Vaush likes to style himself as an opponent of what he calls essentialism, the belief that humans have innate differences in qualities and abilities. The opposite of this quote-unquote essentialism is egalitarianism, the presumption of default human equality in traits. The first problem is that this kind of quote-unquote essentialism has nothing to do with that philosophical term. Essentialism is the proposition that objects participate in universals or essences which account for the identity of those objects despite their differences. For example, both an armchair and a lawn chair are chairs because they participate in the universal chairness. There is an ontological noumena, or thing in itself, behind that chair that makes it a chair. The opposite of essentialism is nominalism. Nominalists would call a chair simply because it has the appearance that we have agreed ought to be called a chair. It posits no underlying essence or universal behind the chair. To illustrate why Vaush is wrong to oppose what he calls essentialism, I'm going to use so-called gender essentialism as an example, the idea that men and women are inherently behaviorally different. This idea has a long history, but if we trace it back to its earliest roots, we find that sex or gender, people didn't really distinguish the two back then, are usually not considered as essential parts of human beings. Yet despite that, people believed in immutable sex differences. Plato, in his Republic, argued that the differences between men and women were secondary to what they are, to such an extent that they could perform any role interchangeably. In other words, there is no male or female essence. The Platonic human form is an archetype that includes both sexes. Nonetheless, Plato obviously accepted that men are typically stronger than women, and for various reasons, were slated to rule over them in society. Next, we can look at Aristotle, who considered gender to be an accident, that is, an attribute of an organism that isn't contained within its form. In other words, again, gender is not essential. The soul, for example, does not have a gender to Aristotle. Both men and women have the same rational essence and differ only in their bodies. This did not stop Aristotle from considering women to be the inferior sex, however. As we can see, essentialism has almost nothing to do with the idea of innate sex differences. Instead, the claim that so-called gender essentialists are making is actually just an empirical one. And as Karl Popper noted in The Open Society and Its Enemies, empiricism operates basically nominalistically, as in it does not rely on the existence of inaccessible and unverifiable universals. People have observed that, on average, men and women behave differently, and science has endeavored to attempt to find why this happens. Evolutionary psychology has investigated this question, concluding that men and women have, for example, different neurophysiology and also different presentations and susceptibilities for mental disorders, indicating that, indeed, there are empirically verifiable innate differences that may drive differences in behavior. If this is true, then behavioral sex differences are true without need of an appeal to any sort of gendered essence. Egalitarians, on the other hand, are the real essentialists. What does it mean to be equal? It means we all must participate in some sort of universal of humanity. In other words, there must be something inside us that makes us identical to all other humans despite our accidental differences. Indeed, egalitarianism owes more to Aristotle and Aquinas than it owes to Marx and the materialists. For the liberals, like for Aristotle, human equality originates in our rational nature in which we all participate. But Nietzsche gives us an alternative idea, that our reasoning skills originate, in fact, from the clashing of natural instincts, which are by no means equally distributed. It remains to be said that the presumption of human equality is directly opposed to all forms of naturalism and nominalism, and leftists and liberals haven't realized this yet. They are engaged in motivated reasoning. Their political philosophies require humans to share a ghastly essence in which we are all equal, and so despite their protestations against the idea of essences, they must believe in them for the sake of propping up egalitarianism. I don't mean to say that there is no noumena behind men, but rather that noumena may very well also be unequal. I mainly just wanted to point out this oversight in leftist thinking.